Today's program is Trailblazers, Horse-Drawn Vehicles from Shelburne Museum's collection. Our presenter is Corey Rogers. He is the Francie and John Downing Senior Curator of American Art at the Shelburne Museum, where he oversees the interpretation and installation of exhibits. He has been at the Shelburne Museum for almost 20 years and has organized a wide array of exhibits with themes from motorcycles, furniture, and jewelry to wildlife decoys and hunting and fishing art, circus posters, and of course, the horse-drawn vehicle collection. He is with us today to help us explore the importance of Shelburne Museum's renowned collection of horse-drawn vehicles of over 200 items and their formative role in the establishment of one of Vermont's most beloved cultural institutions. From carriages and sleighs to wagons and carts, the collection spans the late 19th and early 20th centuries and includes a variety of styles and designs. Corey will highlight key vehicles, their connection to museum founder Electra H. Webb, and their historical significance. This will give us the chance to explore the gone-by days when everyone had a horse and a wagon or two in their barn, as compared to today when everyone has a car or two in our garage. Please welcome Corey Rogers.
Thank you, Marita. Can everyone hear me okay? Are we good? Perfect. I have to say, Marita's been really wonderful. It's really hard to get a hold of me sometimes, and she has the patience of a saint, and I'm so happy that she persisted, and I'm here today to, I'm very excited about it. I was just telling her that this is the first off-site, in-person presentation I've given since COVID. So thank you all for coming out. It's nice to see such a large crowd. I never thought there would be this many people who are interested in our carriage collection. I always like to start by asking people, have you been to the Shelburne Museum? Can you just raise your hand if you've ever been to Shelburne? Okay, then I don't need to tell you any of the background. No, I'm just kidding. Today we're going to be looking at one of the actual first collection that makes up Shelburne Museum, which is a collection of collections. We're about to have 40 structures on our property, and it runs the gamut from everything from 18th and 19th century American paintings to the very first Monet to come to the American shores. We have a really lovely French Impressionist collection, but it was really the carriages is where we started. And if you've been to the museum, have you ever been to Shelburne Farms? Do you know about Shelburne Farms, which is sort of the sister institution? We're constantly being confused with one another, and I'm not going to do anything today to help straighten out any of that confusion, because we're going to start off by talking a little bit about Shelburne Farms and how that organization played a really instrumental and seminal role in the formation of Shelburne Museum. This presentation will feature Shelburne Museum's renowned collection of 18th and 19th century horse-drawn vehicles, including carriages, coaches, and sleighs that are the direct ancestors of modern automobiles. Like cars of today, the original horse-powered vehicles were the products of experimentation and innovation, representing the latest in engineering, style, and comfort of their day. They illustrate important parallels between the past and the present in ways that we perceive, interact, and utilize modes of transportation. Some were status symbols, others public conveyance, while some were used for recreation and others for commerce. Regardless of the obvious technological differences between horse-drawn carriages and automobiles, these relics of the past prove that our basic transportation needs have, for the most part, remained the same. I mentioned that Shelburne Museum's collection of horse-drawn vehicles originated with Shelburne Farms, and that's because the founder of Shelburne Farms, this is the picture of William Seward Webb, really created the nucleus of what would become Shelburne Museum's collection. This is a painting, by the way, of Dr. Webb at the end of his life. It was painted by the American portrait painter William Merritt Chase. In 1880, William H. Vanderbilt told his prospective son-in-law, Dr. William Seward Webb, who was a medical physician. And at the time, that wasn't good enough for a Vanderbilt daughter. So Mr. Vanderbilt decided that he was going to set William Seward up in a job as the head of the Pullman Car Company, which was a train company, right? And so he decided that he wanted to send Mr. Webb to go up to Vermont to see whether the New York City Railroad, which was then controlled entirely by the Vanderbilt family, should take control of the Rutland Railroad. So Mr. Webb ventured to Vermont his first time, and he absolutely fell in love with the state. And while he told Mr. Vanderbilt it wasn't worth buying the Rutland Railroad Company, he said, nonetheless, I'm going to marry your daughter, and we're going to move to Vermont. And that's what they did. They moved into Burlington, where they lived in a place called Oakledge, which is today Oakledge Park. And then after Mr. Vanderbilt died in, I think it was 1891, I believe, Mr. Webb's daughter, wife, Lila Vanderbilt Webb, inherited her, what she was going to get from her father, and they used that money to eventually create what would become Shelburne Farms. This is a wonderful trophy that we have in the collection. It was made by Tiffany & Company, and you can see that really lovely portrait of Mr. Webb. It says W. Seward Webb at the top of the trophy, and this was given to him by the employees of the Pullman Car Company when he retired and moved to Vermont. And what's really lovely is the little train that you see around the base there. He would go on to use Lila's inheritance to purchase 33 farms, which was approximately 4,000 acres along the shores of Lake Champlain near Shelburne, Vermont. This is what we know as today as Shelburne Farms. They reshaped the land by actually removing entire hills, and the landscape that you see today was guided by a plan that was developed by Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who is most famous for designing Central Park in New York City. Eventually, the grand estate would include 30 stately structures, including Shelburne House, which you see in the background here along the top of this hill. And on the other side of that is Lake Champlain, and on the other side of that, as you know, are the Adirondacks. This is Lila Vanderbilt Webb. She's mourning, and this is most likely after her father's death, and she's wearing all black, and they're in this lovely caleche wagon that is today as part of Shelburne Museum's collection. But this just gives you a sense of how stately these vehicles were. These types of vehicles, caleches, which were known because they had these convertible tops, and you can see that when the top came down, can you see my, oh, you can't see it. The fender of the top of the caleche, which is a retractable leather hood, it became a sort of a protective shield against the hub of the wheels, or it became a hubcap, not hubcap, but a cover of the wheels to protect mud from splashing on you. Anyway, this really stately, beautiful estate, it later included 30 structures, like I said, and they were mostly designed by a man named Robert Robertson. And not only did they have these 30 structures on the property, but the estate included an 18-hole golf course, a full acre greenhouse, and miles of roads and buggy trails. The main focus of the farm was designed to improve Vermont's native horses. And what he was basically doing was he wanted to replace the Morgan horse, which was really popular amongst farmers in the state of Vermont, with the English hackney horse. And this didn't work out so well. But they did offer a stud service inside this rather impressive structure that is today known as the breeding barn. This barn is 418 feet long and 107 feet wide, and it's an open span interior. And up until the time they enclosed Madison Square Garden, this was the largest free span interior in the world. So this is a really big structure. Now, what they would do is they would invite farmers to bring in the native mares who were bred with these hackneys who were imported from Britain's Brookfield stud. And at first they were charging a nominal amount of money, but it proved not to be that popular. So eventually they provided this service gratis. Nevertheless, it did not succeed. Now, this is a really important structure on Shelburne Farms. Again, we're not on the museum yet, but this is the farms. This is the coaching barn. And today, if you go to the farms, you'll be able to tour it. It's a really lovely structure. They were using it for weddings for a while. They've sort of stopped doing that now. But what you can't see is once you go through that central arch there is a courtyard. And this is where they would teach young horses how to pull a coach. And it's a really lovely structure, but it also housed the Webb family carriage collection that you can see here. Dr. Webb died in 1926, and his wife, Lila Vanderbilt Webb, inherited the entire collection of his really lovely horse-drawn vehicles, which numbered about 47 at the time. Now, after Mrs. Vanderbilt Webb died in 1936, the children inherited the horse-drawn vehicle collection, and they had to figure out what they were going to do with it. Some wanted to sell it off, some wanted to keep it, but one of the sons, James Watson Webb Jr., James Watson Webb, who was married to Electra Havemeyer Webb, the founder of the museum, his wife, our founder, wanted to keep the collection intact, and she wanted to build a museum to house it. And she convinced her husband's siblings to donate the entire collection with the stipulation that she would create a museum based around it. To do that, she decided that she was going to create an open-air institution that you all know today. This is a very early model of the museum, and over on the proper left side of the screen there, you'll see there's a horseshoe-shaped barn. This barn was the original building of the museum, and it becomes one of the most important structures. It is a two-story horseshoe-shaped barn, and it was built on the grounds in 1949. She incorporated the museum in 1947, and from 1947 until 1952, she spent that period of time, those 5 years, building structures, relocating them onto the grounds, and then building up her collections. And this building, which was made in 1949, was modeled after a unique horseshoe-shaped barn. It was a dairy barn in northern Vermont in the town of Georgia, and this is what it looked like originally. The farmer who owned the barn refused to sell to Mrs. Webb. So Mrs. Webb was able to negotiate for her workmen, her carpenters, to go and make measured drawings of the building and schematics of it, and then she sent them out to source the materials to build this structure that you see today on the museum grounds. It required materials from 12 different Vermont barns and the stones from 2 different grist mills. The outside length of the barn is 238.5 feet with a 32-foot wide interior space. It is built of 745 timbers, posts, and braces, 17,000 feet of plank and other boarding, and 9,000 square feet of slate. It's a big building. This building, I should mention, sadly, 60 years later would burn down, and it no longer exists, which is really sad. No, it wasn't a Webb. I always joked that it was Electra's ghost, but it wasn't. Trust me, I don't want to say that. But you can see this is a very early picture of the museum grounds. This is our Stagecoach Inn, which is an important structure because it houses another one of Electra's very important early collections, and that was her folk art collection that is still there today if you come to visit. But you can see that she used carriages as an integral part of getting around the museum grounds. This was an actual stagecoach that Mrs. Webb had running around the museum, and people could take rides in it to get from one point to another. The majority of the collection, which grew with the acquisition of over 150 other examples, bringing the total number of carriages at the time in the collection to 227, were displayed in the horseshoe-shaped barn. The collection, sadly, has shrunk a little bit due to strategic deaccessioning, which means that we wanted to remove redundancies in the collection, as well as vehicles that were in such bad condition that we couldn't conserve them and maintain them and be good stewards of them. The collection is outstanding both for its breadth of luxury, agricultural, public transit, and sporting vehicles, but also because they are mostly in original condition, which is really, really rare. So when people come, sometimes they're a little dismayed because they see that the varnish is turned, or there's crocodiling of the painted surfaces, or the leather sometimes looks like it's crumbly. That's intentional. We want to maintain these particular vehicles in their original states, or as original as possible. The only other public collection that rivals Shelburne museums here on the east coast of the United States is what used to be at the Stony Brook Museum, but today is now called the Long Island Museum of American Art, History, and Carriages, which is in Stony Brook, Long Island. If you haven't been before, I would highly suggest that you go. It's a really extraordinary institution, not only for its carriages, but also because it has a really great art collection. The museum's collection is displayed, because it's really large, it's displayed in multiple buildings. This is the interior of our Horseshoe Barn Annex, so it's located just right behind the horseshoe-shaped barn. And you can see in this building that there are a lot of public transit vehicles, like the Lady Oxford here, which was again used as public transportation around the museum's grounds for a really long time. There's a really important sleigh that we'll talk a little bit down later in this presentation that's a little further down. And then one of the most extraordinary pieces we have in our collection is a Conestoga wagon that was used to transverse to go across the United States and wound up on the West Coast and then made its way back to the museum. And then the other place that we exhibit these pieces and the sort of nucleus of what this presentation is based on in this Trailblazers exhibition is located in our round barn, which is a really extraordinary structure that was built in the early part of the 20th century. It was made in Passumpsic, Vermont, and then was taken apart and relocated to the museum. However, the only part of the structure they couldn't dismantle was the silo, a 3-story silo. And so they moved it from the northeast of Vermont all the way across the state using a Sikorsky helicopter. And it was appended by 3 guy wires. And during the course of that trip across the state, something happened and 2 of the guy wires snapped. They thought it was a lost cause, but the extraordinary pilot who was able to bring it in landed that silo perfectly in the position it needed to be using 1 wire. So it's extraordinary that this survives today. So that's a little bit of the background about the collection. Now let's look at some very specific examples from the collections. And these are what I call the luxury rides, right? These are the very high-end vehicles that were part of Mr. Webb's original collection. The first piece, and I should say that the quality of photography in this presentation varies, and I apologize for that. Some of them are professionally shot, some of them are shot by me with my iPhone. And what we've discovered when trying to photograph these particular objects is that they're so large, it's really hard to do it somewhere. And they all are in working order. They can be rolled with a team of 4 men. This was moved out of its place where it's exhibited today up against the silo because we wanted a background. And we have had a heck of a time trying to find background paper that we could shoot these on. So that's why we decided to shoot them in the round barn against the silo. So I apologize for the quality of some of these photographs. But this is a really, really important and beautiful example that's in the collection. It was it was commissioned by the Million and Gouillet manufactory in Paris, France. It's the ultimate European luxury import. This Berlin was commissioned by Dr. Webb, the father-in-law of our museum founder, as a companion piece to another piece, another carriage that we're going to look at just next. It's a caleche by the same maker. Berlins were named after the Prussian capital in which they were invented in the 1660s and were designed for long, comfortable distance traveling. This is a really extraordinary example. You'll notice that the body of the vehicle is painted in this sort of deep olive green. That was the color that Mr. Webb chose for all of the vehicles that he had on his farm. In some of the photographs, they'll look like they're black vehicles, but they're not. They're this really dark olive green, which is really lovely. And then we'll look a little bit later, and you'll see that there's their little crest on the side of it. I like to describe the design of these carriages as curves, swerves, curls, furls, and swirls. You'll see that everywhere along the design. The beautiful ironwork chassis to the axles, everything is a work of art on this particular vehicle. This is an example of the Berlin as it was used by the family in the early part of the 20th century. This is a photograph from the wedding procession of Dr. Webb's youngest daughter, I think. Her name was Lila Pulitzer. She married into the Pulitzer family. And you can see that it's set up for postilion driving, which means that they removed the bench on the carriage where the coachman would have sat, and the coach is being driven by the man sitting on the horse, on the left-hand horse. This is a type of driving or coaching called postilion. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful photograph that captures the beauty of the house as well as of the vehicle. The chassis is just extraordinary. This is what I talk about curves, swerves, and swirls and curls and furls, because you can see the level of detail that goes into the construction of even just the most basic elements on this particular vehicle. You'll also notice that, especially in this wheel, that the pinstriping is extraordinary. It's always peeked out in this really lovely, lovely yellow. Here you can see that the hubcap is of the manufacturer and that they're made in Paris. This is a really extraordinary vehicle. This is the Webb family crest that is on the door. Again, you'll get a sense of sort of the texture of these vehicles, how they've aged over time. You can see the color of the vehicles, which is that really lovely olive. And this is the family's crest with the phoenix rising from a crown. The motto, Principia non homines, translates it, I think, as the principle is not the man. This is on all of the vehicles that they had commissioned and were used by the Webb family on Shelburne Farms. This is the door, really, really extraordinary door. But what I want you to notice is that little step at the bottom where you step out. And I'm going to show you a picture of this because this goes to show you how thoughtful they were when it came to the design of these vehicles and how I wish some of our cars today had these attributes. That top slides off when you open the door, and then you put your foot down on a dry pad when you're stepping out of the carriage. So you would not have stepped out and slid off the step. It's a really beautiful, minute detail, but it really shows you the quality of these vehicles. Wait until you see the inside. This is the inside. Intended for formal use by the Webb family in New York City, this Berlin carried them in opulence inside this elegantly appointed interior, trimmed in tufted green silk satin and silk coach lace with taffeta curtains. The ceiling is drawn and pleated satin with a puff and a button motif gathered with a single green satin rosette. And this is just more examples of what the interior of this vehicle looks like. And then that is the rosette at the top. So, you're talking about riding in luxury, right? Remember that was made as a companion piece for another vehicle in the collection? This is it. This is a caleche that was also made by Millon and Pouillet, and it was made in 1880. Like the modern day limousine, caleches were designed to be symbols of wealth and power and were used for formal occasions. In England, the caleche belonged to the state order, which meant that it was reserved for use by the royal family, to be used in processions or on state occasions. However, in the United States, the caleche was used for formal calling or park events. So you would drive through Central Park, you'd want to be seen, and you could put the top down, and everyone would have a good vantage of you as you pass by. It was part of the cultural activities of the well-to-do in late 19th century New York. Dr. Seward Webb commissioned this, again from the maker in Paris, to accommodate his perfectly matched pair of large coaching horses who were named Chilcat and Chilcoot. They were both 17.1 and 17.2 hands tall, so they were very closely matched. The Webbs used the caleche in New York City, where it was important to see and be seen by social peers along Fifth Avenue and in Central Park. The large open design of the body afforded good viewings of the passengers and passers-by. In 1899, Dr. Webb brought his caleche and a team of horses to Montpelier for Admiral George Dewey's use in a parade honoring Dewey as a hometown hero after he defeated the Spanish fleet in Manila the previous year. Really extraordinary. This is a watercolor he had commissioned of the caleche, and you can see that's Chilcat and that's Chilcoot pulling the carriage. Really beautiful. It was this watercolor was done by a man named Max Francis Klepper. This was a very popular thing to do, and we have these in the museum's collection, and they would have been displayed throughout the coaching barn at Shelburne Farms. Why are they called caleches? Because they were convertibles. And this is the collapsible roof that you can see how beautifully curly the metal structures are, the armature. And you can see that large fender at the top there that when it pulled down would act as a mud flap to keep the mud from hitting you as you were driving along on a dry day or a day when the rain had stopped and there was still mud around. Really beautiful example of a carriage. This gives you a sense of how they were put together. Every inch of these vehicles is carved. You can see it in the detail down here. You can see it along the brace there. You can see the original leather straps that still work as the suspension system for this particular carriage. And you can get a better vantage point of that in this photo here. These are the original straps, by the way. So we're going to move now from the high-end luxury vehicles to the things that we would take when we were trying to, move around publicly. And this is what I call the public transit section of the collection. This was a carriage that was made by the Abbott Company. They manufactured about 15,000 of them. These were very popular stagecoaches in the early to mid 19th century. They would have traveled along the route, as you can see, sort of spelled out there along the top. There was a large, commodious sort of luggage rack that you could carry all the luggage of all the passengers. You can see the brake system with that large braking handle. Really, really extraordinary. The museum has about 10 various examples of this particular wagon in the collection, and it's really, really beautiful. There's the Abbott insignia on the side. You can see it travel from New York to Albany. The lovely rack on top there. Just a really, really beautiful example. This one is a little harder to move for some reason. But the reason that these were so popular in their day was because they had developed this very interesting and innovative way of suspending the vehicle, again, by leather straps that you can see along the bottom of the vehicle there. This is one of my favorites. This was made by the manufacturer Hinks & Johnson. It was made in Bridgeport, Connecticut, around 1895. It's a hansom cab, and it was purchased by the museum in 1952. This vehicle was named after the English architect Joseph A. Hansom, who patented the original design in 1834. The hansom cab was the first taxi cab or carriage for hire in English cities and became known as the gondola of London. Later, in the 19th century, the hansom cab became popular in the United States because it could maneuver easily through crowded streets. The driver sat in the back, which we'll see in just a second, on the rear of the vehicle, affording him an excellent view of the horse and the street. The driver, who also operated a hand lever, which we'll see in just a second, which was attached to two drive chains that opened and closed the cab doors for the passengers. And you can see that one of the doors is open in this particular example here. This is what it looks like up close. And then this little thing here, this little circular thing, that's the only time you see the chain on the exterior of the vehicle. But there was a chain they pull the mechanism, the doors would swing wide open. You could do one, or you could do both of them at the same time. Really, really beautiful vehicles. Really, really easy to use. I want you to look at this photograph, and it gives you a little bit of an example of the interior and how well it was appointed. The beautifully tufted leather upholstery made it for an easy, clean, and comfortable ride. The small squares that you see sort of on either side there in the back wall, those have little cords that have tufted tassels on them. And whenever you needed to talk to the driver, you would pull one of those out, and you could just reach your head back and give him a direction if you needed to change destinations. The cab number is indicated in the back there. That is a punched stencil made out of metal, and this indicates that this was originally cab 87. You can't see it here, but what's really beautiful is there is a windshield, a glass windshield, that flips up when you want to drive with open air, but if it's inclement weather, you can put it down and you'd still have a really good view. This is the edge of it right there along the top of the photograph. One of the things that I love the most about this particular piece is the ironwork on the top. See that wonderful sort of Eastlake style metal appendage at the top? Those were the rein holders. So the reins of the horses would go through those little points, and it would lead down to the horse down in front. And so that's how they would maneuver the horse. You'll see in this next photograph, you can see that there's the luggage rack that goes on the back. This was the seat in the back where the cab driver would sit. You can sort of see the handle there that he would have used. Like the modern equivalents, hansom cabs were popular public conveyances, only in the largest cities in America. Some, however, were used as privately, and as this piece we think was at one point. The presence of the luggage rack on top of the cab and the position of the driver's seat at the rear identify the cab as a public vehicle, so this was something that was actually used in cities. The kerosene burning lanterns that you see on the side here were really extraordinary. You can hardly see it, but two sides of the interior of the lantern consist of a highly polished metallic surface that was intended to help reflect the meager light that was produced by the burning filament or wick in the lamp there. The oil would have been carried down into the little post underneath. It's really beautiful, and one of the things that you can't really see here because it's sort of hard, but there's a little red glass circular dot there, and that was the precursor of today's brake lights, so that you would see the vehicle from behind if there was some sort of break in the I pulled my microphone in the vehicle. This is the handle that was used that would help activate the internal chain mechanism that opens and shuts this sort of saloon-style doors. I apologize for knocking my microphone off. I'll just continue. Sure. I was expecting some sort of technical difficulty caused by me, and I was right. Sure, yeah, I'm a very active gesticulator, so thank you. I love the fact that Shelburne Museum also has a historical toy collection, and this is a really lovely example of a handsome cast iron toy in the collection. Electra was really interested in collecting things in their original surfaces, so this is actually the original untouched paint surface of this late 19th century toy. It's very accurate in its depiction and portrayal of this handsome cab. The only thing that's missing with this one is you'll notice that the tab underneath the horse's right front hoof is missing its little metal wheel. Somehow it has become detached. On a more somber note, this is a really extraordinary example in our collection. It was a hearse that was made by the A. Tolman Company of Worcester, Massachusetts, and it dates to circa 1849. Like the Postal Service, neither sleet, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays death from the swift completion of its appointed rounds. That was a quote from the 19th century. The hearse, with its interchangeable wheels and sleigh runners, enabled the morticians at Maple Grove Cemetery Association in Bakersfield, Vermont, to discharge their duties year-round. And you can't see it here, but when you go to the museum, which I hope you all will do, on display you'll see underneath the hearse are the original bobsleds that attach to the axles of the carriage, and that makes it transforms it or converts it into a winter vehicle. And now, it's hard to see in this, but people are always asking me about this, so I thought I would just mention it. The wicker casket, or the ambulance basket as it was called, displayed inside the hearse, was used to carry the deceased from the place of death to their home or to the funeral parlor. The open weave allowed air to circulate around the body, helping to slow decomposition rates during warmer weather. And this is a better example. You can see the beautiful texture. This, you should notice the beautiful cast iron inverted torch affixed in between the window panels was meant to symbolize the inextinguishable eternal flame, or the Christian symbol of resurrection. But this is what the casket looks like when it's outside of the vehicle. So we all have to get around. As we all know, one of the, I don't want to say cons of living in the state of Vermont, but one of the challenges is getting around the state during the winter months, right? As it was for our ancestors in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This is a really extraordinary horse-drawn snowplow that's from the late 19th century, and it was used in Hyde Park, Vermont for many, many years. This, you can see the blade, you can see the original mechanisms, the pulls that were used to manipulate the blade so you could direct the snow. And this is a better example where you can see where the man would have sat behind the plow blade who was manipulating the levers, and then the horse would be pulling it. Now, once you were able to push the snow out of the way for easy and unencumbered transportation and travel by sleighs, you would then need to pack the snow, right? And so we have an early example of a snow roller. And it's a two-wheeled vehicle that is sadly displayed. It's so big, it had to be displayed in one of our barns around the museum's grounds. This is behind the Dutton House, which was from Cavendish, Vermont. And you can see that it was pulled by horses, and there are these really massive sort of barrel-style wheels that would have helped compact and level the snow that you see, or would have to drive on. Remember when we were looking at the interior of the Horseshoe Barn Annex, and I mentioned that there was a really important yellow sleigh that played an important role in the history of Shelburne Museum? It's this piece. This is a stage sleigh, and it dates from 1800. It was originally manufactured and used in Massachusetts. This stage sleigh provided a means of public transportation when winter snow made it difficult to pull a stagecoach. The stage sleigh was a large glassed-in box with doors, set on runners with a seat for a coachman on the outside. This stage sleigh was used for almost 100 years to carry passengers between Worcester and Lowell, Massachusetts. And in 1899, it was purchased by Dr. William Seward Webb, who brought it to Vermont, where it was used to bring winter guests from Shelburne Railroad Station to Webb House on Shelburne Farms. And that's important because the very first time Electra Webb ever came to Shelburne, it was in the winter. And here you can see her dressed in her winter clothing. This was actually when she's 18 years old at this point, and she was still in mourning for her father who had died. Her father was this really interesting character. We're sort of trying to figure out how do we grapple with his legacy today. This is sort of a tangent, so you'll forgive me. Her father was a man named H.O. Henry Osborne Havemeyer, and he was the sugar baron of the United States. He owned something like 27 out of the 32 sugar refineries in the United States that operated in the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. He worked with sugar cane, but he also was really important in bringing in beet sugar that they would harvest out west in places like Colorado. And at one point, he got in trouble with the United States government because they accused him of manipulating the import scales for his sugar cane when it came into the United States. And it was obviously manipulated in his favor, right? And so there was a huge trial. It lasted for a really long time. Ultimately, they found that the manager of the refinery was responsible for manipulating the scales, so not technically Mr. Havemeyer's fault, but nevertheless, the stress that this brought on caused him to have to die at an early age. And so you can see Electra here still in mourning for her father. Now, one way she wanted to get beyond sort of her personal grief was her family encouraged her to get out there. After her father died, her mother and her, they went to Egypt, and there's all these really great photos of them wearing black clothing with these big, exotic bird hats on camels as they were sort of touring the pyramids, and in these really heavy-looking wool garments. You're like, man, they must have been sweating. But they didn't let you see it. They kept it to themselves. But anyway, so one of the ways that she was trying to sort of distract herself from her personal grief was to go to Shelburne Farms. And the first time that she did, she recalled seeing this really beautiful yellow sleigh where one of her husband's brothers met her. He was driving the sleigh, met her at the station, and then they drove up together, and then she fell in love with the Mr. Webb she ended up marrying, and that just sort of set everything into motion. She was a really extraordinary person. Her parents, Electra got the collecting bug from her parents. Her parents were inveterate collectors. Her father collected Asian art and old master paintings like Rembrandt's, Vermeer's, all sorts of really important European painters. And her mother was this really extraordinary woman, and someday we'll have to give a talk to you all if you're interested in her. Her name is Louisine Havemeyer, and she was good friends with the American painter Mary Cassatt, who lived in Paris. And Mary Cassatt convinced her to start collecting Impressionist paintings. And so that's why we have the first Monet to ever come to the American shores. It was because Mrs. Webb's mother was collecting very early on. And if you ever go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, almost the entire collection of Impressionist works there come from Mrs. Webb's parents. But Electra's collecting interests, as you can see from the carriage collection, diverted very drastically from that of her parents, so much so that her mother, when she bought a cigar store Native American figure, her mother says, "Electra, what have you done?" And she says, "I bought art." And the mother never, ever conceded that American folk art was art. In fact, Electra, sorry, get another tangent. Electra had these beautiful homes, one in Westbury, Long Island, because her husband was a polo player. He was actually an expert, a professional polo player. And in their living room there, she put up this hand-painted wallpaper that had really choppy waters. And her mother refused to sit looking at the wallpaper because she said it made her seasick when she painted. So let's get back to the talk, shall we? There are other examples of stagecoaches and school bus sleighs in the museum's collection. And one of the ones that I don't have a photo of, which is really, really extraordinary, that I wish I did include, was a school bus that was used to bring children to school in the state of Vermont. I think it was in the Northeast Kingdom. And it has a cast iron stove on the inside of it to help warm the kids. So it has a little chimney. It's a really interesting vehicle. Just another example of this beautiful stagecoach. I'm working on an exhibition right now on the history of bent wood design in America, which is a really important story to tell, and it'll be everything from vehicles to furniture, hockey sticks, lacrosse sticks, to, you can name it. It's going to be a really wild and broad show. But the genesis of this exhibition really started with the museum's sleigh collection, because if you look at these vehicles, they're extremely extraordinary in their geometry. This is all bent wood, and it's sort of a compound bend. So you have it bending this way, as you have it bending this way. It's really, really beautiful. This particular sleigh is attributed to a man named James Gould, who was a sleigh manufacturer in Albany, New York, and therefore it's called an Albany sleigh. It was made sometime around 1860. Analogous to the elaborate custom automotive paint jobs of today, this is what I wanted to focus on for this particular vehicle. Located in the central panel of what's called a swell body, were meticulously hand-painted, layer by layer, a tartan plaid. It's composed of stripes of different shades of green and various colors, running diagonally across at right angles to each other. Now, this was a notoriously complicated thing to execute. And one of the great resources that we have as historians who work with horse-drawn vehicles are these industry publications that exist. And one in particular was called The Hub. And The Hub was something that carriage makers, sleigh makers, they all used. It would have patterns in it. It would also have patterns for the paint jobs. It would have the latest designs and techniques for manufacturing some of these sleighs. Some of the detail is so granular and you get so confused. It's like reading stereo instructions. But they're really important to helping us understand why and how some of the designs on these particular vehicles were executed. And one of the ones that I love the most was from this publication in 1885. And basically it was telling the carriage painters, don't waste your time trying to do tartans. It just won't get you anywhere. You can see that this whole vehicle is a profusion of different patterns. You can see that there's the cut velvet carpeting that lines the interior on that beautiful sort of cobra-shaped dashboard. You can see that there's beautiful painting and stenciling, all done with gold paint. Really extraordinary. But this is the piece that I really wanted to focus on for you all today. That is that little section right there in the middle underneath the driver's seat. And it's extraordinary in its complexity. And it's very rare that this was executed in the United States because, again, these manufacturers and painters were warning against it because it was so complex. This is another really extraordinary bent wood piece in the collection, and it was made by a man named Abraham Acker, and he was manufacturing in Sing Sing, New York. Not the prison, but the town. And this is what's called a caleche sleigh, and it dates from about 1880. And this sleigh was one of the Webb family's favorites, and it was often used for winter outings. Its manufacturer in New York, it was manufactured in New York along the Hudson River. The body of the 6-seat caleche sleigh with its vis-a-vis seats, these are the seats here in the back, where the people are looking at each other. They're facing each other. Is a really lovely example. It's graceful, and it looks very much like the swell-bodied vehicle that we saw in the previous slides. Unlike the Gould, that swell-body Albany sleigh, this is characterized by sweeping arabesque ironwork, which had sweeping arabesque ironwork. The double bobs on this particular model sort of sometimes detract, I think, from the overall symmetry of the vehicle, but the finials on the front, which are these really extraordinary eagle heads, if you can see them, the little gold things at the top of the dashboard there, are really, really lovely. And this sleigh is an extreme example of sort of the early forays unknowingly into aerodynamic design that would become a science that we all know today. Really, really lovely. And you get a sense for why they're called swell bodies, because you can see them bulging out on the sides there. Really, really beautiful. This is just an example of where you could step as you were getting in, the driver was getting into the sleigh. There's a nice little teardrop-shaped piece of iron. Every aspect of this piece was designed, and it's beautiful. This is one of my other favorite sleighs in the collection. We don't know who made this particular sleigh. We think that it was New England, and we think even more so that it may have been made in Vermont. This sleigh was found in northern Vermont and may have been made in this state. It's unique because of its custom paint job that consists of a large portrait of a bull moose on the rear and cattails on the side panels, which is sort of an interesting subject matter for a sleigh, but I digress. The body is painted in a golden yellow, and the interior of the sleigh is a bright orange. Sleighs were often embellished with brightly painted surfaces, something not generally found on carriages. And the reason being that the travel in the wintertime was clean in comparison to travel rough, rocky, dusty, muddy roads during the rest of the year. The paint was an expensive material and only used where it could be considered sensible. And that's why we have it on this particular sleigh. These are just some of the details of the beautiful painting that you'll see along the body of this. This is called a cutter. It's really interesting. And then there's the portrait of the moose. But my favorite aspect of this entire vehicle is, I don't know if you can see it, but on the very part of that orange dashboard, the very front, there's a little square. That little square is an actual painting. And that little painting is a winter scene that you see where they've broken the plane by adding these little flourishes of snow dripping down from the sides. Really, really beautiful example in the collection. The next vehicle that we have is what was made by the Brewster Company. And Brewster was a really important manufacturer out of New York City, and they manufactured carriages as well as sleighs. Now, this particular design of sleighs was called a Russian sleigh, and it dates from about 1880. And again, it's in that sort of olive green that you see most of the Webb family sleighs or vehicles. The Swedish automotive manufacturer Volvo's slogan, "They're boxy, but they're good," could be used to describe the design of this compact sleigh. The dashboard rises perpendicular to the floor, and the solid runners are ribbed in a distinctive horizontal design. Its shape was adapted by Brewster from a true Russian sleigh. In 1886, this sleigh was brought to Burlington and was used in the Winter Carnival, which featured ice skating, ice boat racing, trotting races, as well as along the lake, and tobogganing and snowshoeing contests that ended up in a fireworks display. So we know exactly how these were used. So you can't really tell, but the grill there is a perforated metal screen that sort of goes up. And out to the side are these little loops of metal, and that's where the reins would have gone so that they would have attached to the horses. This is really extraordinary. This is, I don't know where there, oh, sorry. I don't know what I've done here. Sorry, I'm going out of the way here. This is what's called a traverse. Measuring 19 feet long and 29 inches wide, this traverse took off down a snow-covered slope or a street, carrying 8 to 12 people aboard, hands grasping the ropes and the feet on the side, the grooves on the side of each side of the vehicle. And where was I? The front rod, which you'll see in another slide that I have here, was activated and it was used to bring down a brake blade that would cut into the and slow to the track and slow the sled. The other brake levers at the back bit the ice and they slowed it down. In the Vermont Winter Sports Carnival of 1877 and 1878, traverse coasting accompanied tobogganing, horse racing on ice, an ice boat regatta, and an adult sport that was competitive akin to today's interest in outdoor winter sports. So this particular traverse we know was used in Burlington, Vermont for their winter festivals. And if you've been to Burlington and you know what Main Street looks like, it's a pretty precipitous hill. And this would have gone down the hill, brought back up, and done multiple times. You can see here, or down here, is the metal lever that you would use to brake. So in addition to having all of these vehicles in the collection, we try to bring everything that we can that's associated with carriaging and sleighing into the collection. And we thought we had everything. We have everything from hitching posts to stagecoach stairs to all the blankets that people wore when they were driving in carriages. And we had so many things. And I just want to say, we're not collecting carriages, so I apologize. If any of you have anything you want to give to the museum, we're not actively collecting in that area just because we don't have storage space and exhibition space, and they're very, very hard to take care of. But we were approached during the pandemic by a man who lived in Alaska. And he said, I have something that I bet you don't have. And I'm like, okay, hit me with it. And he did. What he had was probably the world's largest collection of slang music sheets for music songs. And we probably have about 90 to 100 of these. They're beautifully illustrated. And this is a very specific genre of music that was produced in the late 19th century because slang was a popular activity for people during the winter time. And most of the time it was used for courting. So a lot of these songs are romantic. By today's standards, they're pretty tame, but some in the day were pretty risque. And some of them were just flat out racist, so we don't really exhibit those. But what we have is this really extraordinary group of materials. And one of the things that I want to do as a curator is invite music groups to come in and perform and record these songs so that we can share them. So if you know anybody, please let me know. I would love to have it. Jingle Bells, the popular Christmas song, originated as a sleighing song tonight, right? So that's one of the lyrics. So these are really beautiful. Some of them are pretty extraordinary, and I don't know if you can tell in this middle medallion here, but you can see that this guy who's driving the horse that's sort of in the background, the sleigh in the background, was going a little too fast, got a little too close to the oncoming traffic, and is having to swerve out of the way. This was a very dangerous thing, and it happened more often than you can imagine. And there are really horrific sort of historical accounts of some of these sleighing accidents that ended in either severe injury or death. And so they were also sort of captured in the illustrations here. And so there we have it. This is sort of the last one that we have. Really, really beautiful examples. I will say that if any of you are feeling like you want to make a 2-hour drive north this winter, after Thanksgiving, the museum has started this new thing called Winter Lights, where we have special holiday light displays that are designed by artists who come in, and then it's several nights a week, and it lasts from the Friday after Thanksgiving until the into the first week of January. It's a new thing that we started. It's been very popular. Last year we had over 50-something thousand people come to the museum in less than a month, which is pretty extraordinary. And so my hope is that at one of these Winter Lights performances, events, there will be a performance of some of the sleighing music. With that, I thank you all for your patience and your attention. And if you have any questions, please just let me have it, and I'll do my best.
And we have microphones, so if you will raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you for questions. Excuse me, Mary, can you just pull forward? Thanks. I didn't see anything like a little pony trap.
We have a lot of pony vehicles in the collection, and one of the things that I didn't include, and I'm remiss for not doing it, is that the children, not only were they training ponies and learning to drive on ponies, but they actually had things called goat carts, not go-karts, but goat carts. These were little miniature carts that were designed to be pulled by goats. And we have a really cool collection of them. And we have one from the 18th century that came from Europe. I'm sorry, I'm sort of diverging from your question here, but this has got me going on a tangent. But we have a little miniature 18th century cart that came from Europe. It's really extraordinary, and they're exact replicas down to the last detail of the larger vehicles. And so we have a bunch of those, which I didn't include because, sorry, I just didn't think of it. But yes, there are lots of pony vehicles in the collection that I didn't get into. There was one that we have, I don't know if it's exactly a pony trap, but it's a little cart that was used to teach the Webb family children how to drive, and they had little whips along the sides of them, and they would go. There are lots of pony carts driven around Shelburne farms today. I actually live on the property, and sometimes I get behind a little pony cart, and the rule is that you don't pass them, so you have to sit behind them the entire time. And so for someone like me who has a little bit of road rage, it's a real test of patience. But yes, we have them in the collection. I'm sorry. Yes?
That bent wood really looks fascinating. Are they one solid piece, or are they several joined
Some
together?
of them they're joined. They're joined underneath, and you couldn't see it. Let me see if I can go back a little bit. But you can see in the body designs that some of them are overlapping, and some of them. So let me see here. Yeah, you can see here that there's a ridge right here, so it's applied on the top of it. So there's one piece and then another piece, and then there's another piece coming this way. So they're sort of cobbled together out of multiple pieces, but nevertheless, it's really hard to bend wood, and they do it really beautifully. And the fact that these haven't broken over the years is really extraordinary. These are in a unclimate-controlled building. We do have these really hideous fans that we use to keep in there to keep the air moving around so that we don't develop mold in the building. But these are pretty much being kept in the same conditions that they were, 100 years ago. And so it's really extraordinary that the humidity hasn't caused any of them to deform or to break. So it just goes to show you how beautifully constructed they are.
Wasn't there a Concord coach manufacturing in Springfield, Vermont?
I don't know that. I don't know about that. Was there?
But where were they manufactured? Do you have one?
We have Concord coaches, yes. I don't know exactly where most of them were manufactured. We probably have, I think, maybe 5 or 6 examples in the collection. And that's interesting. I didn't know that there was a manufacturer here in Springfield. Not sure. I have to say, this is my first time in your beautiful community, and it's really nice, and I want to spend more time here. But this was a creative hub. And in addition to Concord coaches that I'm finding out today, you had a really amazing and important pewter smith in this town whose name was Richard Lee. And Mr. Lee was known for manufacturing pewter doll hands, little doll hands that made of cast pewter that you would attach to a cloth doll. He also made things like porringers and ladles and all their what's called hollowware, which are teapots and stuff. And so we need to do more research. We need to come here and figure out what else is going on in this area. But again, sadly, in 20 years, this is my first time coming here. And it was a lovely drive, and it's a beautiful community. And I hope to spend more time here. So I'll look into that, see if we have any that were manufactured in the state.
I believe you'll find that the Concord coach was made in Concord, New Hampshire.
Concord, New Hampshire, yes. Originally, I think it originated in Concord, New Hampshire, but there were other manufacturers, just like the Abbott coach.
Abbott and Downing.
Yeah, Abbott and Downing. There's other coaches that other companies that are making it around. Yes, thank you, Abbott and Downing. You're next.
I live in Ackworth, New Hampshire, which is 10 or 15 miles from here. And I would like to invite you and anyone else who's interested to see the recently restored carriage barn behind our beautiful church, with the restored hearse inside they put a glass panel at the front of the stall that the hearse is in. And the hearse, I remember from my childhood because it was stored in my grandmother's barn, along with a hay wagon and in extension of the house upstairs, there was a sleigh.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know whatever became of that sleigh, but it was really beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation. I'd love to take you up on that. It sounds extraordinary. As you know, I have a thing for hearses. I didn't want to see one personally for a while. I don't have to use one, I should say. Yes.
Can you tell us approximately what the weight ranges are on these sleighs?
Oh, I don't really know, to be honest with you, but I do know that it takes several grown men of a certain size to move these vehicles around. And for, as bulky and as large as they are, it's really amazing to see how easily maneuverable they are because they have sort of that like fifth wheel sort of front design. And they're able to sort of swing them into this very tight spaces. But I'm sad I don't know. They must weigh a lot. Yeah, because they're wood, and the leather is pretty heavy too.
Can you tell me how you came about learning about all of these things? You came to a museum that had all these sleighs and vehicles, and you must have had to do a lot of research and
I'm
education.
still learning. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still learning. I'm actually not a paintings expert. My title would lead you to believe that I'm an American fine arts expert. I'm a decorative arts expert and design expert. So I studied American furniture, American glass, American ceramics, and this was at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. And I focused on actually mid-century modern design, which is sort of strange, but I had an unrelated minor in 18th and 19th century Staffordshire English ceramics. And a woman who was a professor of mine, they do these really intensive 2-week courses, 2-week courses. And one of them happened to be a woman named Jean Burks, who was the former curator at Shelburne. And she was teaching me Shaker furniture because she was one of the leading experts in Shaker furniture. And as you can imagine, there's not a lot of opportunities for a decorative arts historian after you graduate. And so I moved back home, and I lived with my parents in Oklahoma for about 6 weeks, which was really hard. And then I remembered this woman, Jean Burks, and that she had an internship at Shelburne Museum. And I called her up out of the blue and said, hey, listen, do you need help? I need a job, and I got to get out of Oklahoma. I can't stay here any longer. And she invited me up, and I helped her with the renovations of our decorative arts galleries. And that was in 2004, and I've been there ever since. And every day has been a dream because that collection is so weird, so broad, and just really extraordinary that I've never been bored a day in my life working there. And one of the things is that we have 4 curators who are working there. And so we've sort of divvied up these multiple collections. If you go by what we call our notebooks, because we're not completely digitized in our collections. I was saying earlier, we think we have somewhere between 130 and 150,000 objects. And unlike most museums, we have the opposite problem, where most of the collection, 20% is probably on view and 80% is in storage. Well, we have 40 buildings, or 39 buildings currently, and so most of the collection is actually out. So we're in the process of digitizing the collection, so we don't really know what we have. And every day is just like a treasure hunt. Someone will come up and say, I was just saying earlier, they found Victorian mustache cups in our collection. Who even knew such a thing existed? And they're just like little porcelain cups that are really beautiful, and they're beautifully decorated, and they have like a little wavy guard on the inside of it, so you won't get cream in your mustache. And I was saying that my favorite one was the one that said "Mom" on the side of it. Her mother. And I said, oh, that was an awful conversation. And it was a terrible gift. But so it just felt, so we only have 4 curators, and we divvy up the collection. And so I took sort of the things that were sort of orphaned for a long time. I took up the circus collection, which I've spent the last 20 years researching, which is really extraordinary. We used to have great circus vehicles, but sadly they all sort of were left exposed, and they deteriorated. I took the wildfowl decoy collection, which has been one of the pleasures of my life, learning about this. I'm not a hunter. I come from a family of hunters. Have no interest in hunting, but I see them as really beautiful works of art. And then I took on the carriages, the toys, and then I do the ceramics and glass and all that as well. But you have to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, is what I say.
And what's your background? What got you interested to go to school for history?
Oh, that's a good question. My brothers, I was the middle child, and my older and younger brother were very talented athletes. and they would travel all over Oklahoma to these games and matches or whatever you want to call them. And I was the shy, bookish, overweight kid who didn't want to go anywhere. And so I would stay with my grandmother. And my grandmother was an amazing painter. And she had all of these books and all of these magazines that she would use for inspiration. And I remember staying with her and flipping through these magazines, and it sort of just sparked this interest in what was art. And so that's sort of how I got into this field. So yeah. We all come to it from a different path. Yes, sir. You have a very great voice. I wish I had your voice. It will carry. I can hear you.
I'm right with you. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment. Where I grew up, and when I grew up in Woodstock, we had a stables there for the Woodstock Inn. And it was 192.5 feet long, 65 feet wide, 2 stories. And it was kept 60 horses in one end of it. And the other end was large enough to bring in stagecoaches with 4 horses on them and swing them inside the building and offload. Unhitch the horses, take them directly into the horse end. And there was an 8 by 18 foot hand-operated elevator that would put the coach onto the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
And that was still there and operating when I was a kid. And I grew up in there.
That's amazing.
And what I always wished, of course, back then nobody was worrying about history. But back then, that would have been a perfect building to have gone to Shelburne.
Yeah.
And they half tore it down and then it caught fire and burned.
That's the
But
trash.
at 12 years old, I could operate that elevator with a sleigh on it.
That's
And we
amazing.
had a selection on the top floor, half of it. And the majority of them, I was told, were local carriages and sleighs that when the horses left, had gone to the stables for storage. And most of them had been, at some point or another, restored. And our job as kids was once a year to take them down the elevator, take them out onto Court Street, and wash them and chamois them, and then bring them back in.
That's amazing. Do you have any photos of you doing this?
I'm doing a book on it.
Oh, that's great.
But unfortunately, photos at a 10 and 12-year-old didn't really exist.
Oh, please keep me posted with this book. I want to buy a copy of it. We're going to buy one for the museum's collection. That'd be amazing. Thank you. Do you remember the breeding barn that I showed you earlier, that big, large open expanse? They had elevators, just like what you're describing, that would bring the carriages up to the 2nd floor, and they would be stored there. If you ever go to Shelburne Farms, which I highly recommend that you do, take one of the tours. You can see that building. That huge barn recently, I think they had a grant, and they completely reshingled the whole thing. And it took months, and it's gorgeous. I think there might be some idea of turning it into sort of a visitor center, but if you go, please go check it out. It's a really extraordinary. And I don't know if the elevator's still there or not.
We were fortunate a few years ago of visiting it, and we got the tour, and Mr. Webb that died this past year,
Mm-hmm.
he gave us the tour.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was opening up doors with keys and taking us to on the 2nd floor.
Marshall Webb, yeah.
Yes, yes,
He was an extraordinary man.
yes, he was.
Yeah, he really, really was. A real tragedy.
Yes, Bruce and I went up last fall. It makes a great foliage trip to go up to the museum. And at the beginning, so many of you raised your hands that you've been there, but it's time to go back for another visit. And now you'll be able to go up close and look for all those details of the carriages that he's talked about.
Please don't open the doors. That's the biggest problem we have at the museum. We've had to wire them shut because that one that I showed you, the interior with the beautiful taffeta and silk, that door is always being pulled ajar and so hard that the line snaps. This is like fishing wire. And so we try not to open them because we don't want to expose the interiors to light. We also don't want to ruin the mechanism or the hinges. So, but if you want to see one, call me. I'll come and I'll open the door for you.
Well, that's a great invitation. Well, we want to thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
has been wonderful.